Horse refuses to leave wounded friend's side. The story behind it will break your heart. How do you think this story will unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The golden light of dawn bathed the sprawling countryside in a warm glow, casting long shadows over the gently rolling hills. Morning mist lingered low across the grass, giving the land an ethereal and dreamlike quality. Birds chirped softly in the distance, their songs blending with the quiet whisper of the wind that carried across the empty plains. It was a scene that might have inspired poetry, serene, untouched, and utterly beautiful. But the silence was broken by a sound. A horse. A lone, chestnut-colored horse stood still in the middle of the field, his glossy coat glimmering under the early rays of the sun. He was a magnificent animal, strong and proud, with a graceful frame that reflected years of care and training. But something about him seemed off. His ears were pinned back slightly, his head hung low, and his dark eyes held a look of confusion and pain as if something wasn't right. A closer look revealed the truth. Lying motionless on the dry, sunlit ground was a man. His body was still, sprawled across the dirt like a rag doll, as though he had been thrown from the horse. His worn brown coat was coated in dust, and his hat lay a few feet away, half buried in the yellowed grass. His breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. The horse, whose name was Thunder, stayed close. He refused to leave the rider's side, nudging him softly with his muzzle, letting out quiet, pleading whinnies as if trying to wake him up. Thunder pawed at the ground, his hooves kicking up small clouds of dust as he grew restless, but he never strayed too far from the man. His loyalty to the fallen rider was unwavering. It had been hours, perhaps since the night before, that Thunder had been there watching over him. The sun had come and gone, and though the temperature was beginning to rise, the horse hadn't moved. If someone had passed by earlier, they might have assumed the horse was grazing lazily beside his rider, but now anyone who looked closer would understand the truth. Something terrible had happened, and the horse knew it. Thunder's story, and that of his rider, was one of devotion forged through years of partnership. The man, named Ethan, had raised Thunder from a foal, caring for him like family. Ethan had always been the quiet, dependable type, a rancher with calloused hands and a gentle spirit who had found solace in the company of his horse. The two of them shared countless adventures, days spent herding cattle, nights under the stars where the only sounds were the crackling of a campfire and the occasional snort of the horse. Thunder was more than just an animal to Ethan. He was a friend, a confidant, and in many ways a reflection of Ethan's own soul. They understood each other without words, communicating instead through gestures, soft pats, and the unshakable trust that had grown between them. Ethan often joked that Thunder was the smarter of the two, quicker to sense danger, more aware of the world around them. And maybe, just maybe, he had been right. The previous day had begun like any other. Ethan had saddled up Thunder at sunrise, preparing for a long ride across the pasture to check on his cattle. It was one of those perfect autumn mornings where the air was crisp and clean, carrying with it the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Thunder's hooves clicked rhythmically against the ground as they moved, the silence of the open field broken only by the occasional rustle of wind-blown grass. Ethan had been lost in thought as they rode, thinking about repairs he needed to make on the barn, how he would spend the upcoming holidays, and what he might cook for dinner that night. But then, in an instant, everything had changed. Thunder had been the first to sense it. His ears shot up, his body tensed, and before Ethan could react, the horse reared back, startled by something neither of them saw. Ethan, caught off guard, lost his balance and fell, hitting the ground hard. The breath had been knocked from his lungs, and darkness quickly swallowed him as the world faded. Thunder had whinnied in panic, circling his fallen rider, nudging him desperately with his muzzle, trying to get him to move. But Ethan didn't respond. Thunder stayed there, guarding him, refusing to leave even as the hours dragged on and the sun dipped low in the sky. By nightfall, Thunder had grown tired, his body trembling from a mix of worry and exhaustion. But he remained steadfast, lying down near Ethan to keep watch over him through the cold, dark hours. The horse knew, somehow he just knew, that Ethan needed him and he would not abandon his friend. Now, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thunder let out a low, mournful sound, nudging Ethan's arm once more with his nose. The man didn't move. Thunder turned his head to the horizon, his ears twitching at the faint sound of something approaching, voices perhaps, or the rumble of distant tires. A small group of ranch hands had been sent out that morning to look for Ethan. When he hadn't returned the night before, they knew something was wrong. Ethan was nothing if not reliable, and he would never leave Thunder unattended or stay out overnight without good reason. The search party consisted of 3 men on horseback, all of whom had worked with Ethan for years. As they rode toward the field, one of the men, Sam, spotted something in the distance. "Wait a second," he said, pointing. "Is that Thunder?" The others squinted against the sun, and sure enough, they could make out the figure of the chestnut horse standing alone in the vast expanse of golden grass. Sam's brow furrowed. Something wasn't right. "Let's get closer," he said, urging his horse forward. The group rode quickly, the rhythmic pounding of hooves cutting through the quiet. Thunder turned his head at the sound, his dark eyes watching them closely. He didn't run or shy away as they approached. Instead, he stood his ground as if he had been waiting for them to arrive. Sam was the first to see Ethan lying in the dirt, unmoving. His heart leapt into his throat. "Ethan!" he shouted, dismounting and rushing to his friend's side. The others followed suit, and Thunder stepped back slightly, his muscles tense as he watched the men gather around Ethan. Sam knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck and letting out a shaky breath when he felt the faint, steady thrum of a pulse. "He's alive," Sam said, relief washing over his face. "He's hurt, but he's alive." Thunder let out a soft, relieved whinny as if he understood the words. Sam looked over at the horse, his expression softening. "You stayed with him all night, didn't you?" he said quietly, reaching out to stroke Thunder's neck. The horse lowered his head, his ears twitching, and Sam swore he could see gratitude in the animal's eyes. The group wasted no time. One of the ranch hands rode back to the main house to call for help while the others carefully lifted Ethan onto a makeshift stretcher. Thunder followed close behind as they carried him away, his hooves moving slowly, as though he was afraid to leave Ethan for even a moment. When the paramedics arrived, Thunder stayed near the edge of the field, watching as they loaded Ethan into the ambulance. He didn't move until the vehicle had disappeared down the dirt road, carrying his friend to safety. As the hours passed and the sun dipped low on the horizon once more, Thunder remained in the same spot, staring down the road as if waiting for Ethan to return. The ranch hands brought him back to the barn, offering him food and water, but Thunder barely touched it. He lingered near the fence, ears perked, eyes focused on the distance. It was as if he didn't fully trust that Ethan would come back unless he saw it with his own eyes. And in truth, Thunder wouldn't rest until his rider was home again. Days passed since the accident. Ethan was rushed to the nearest hospital, a small facility several miles away. The doctors confirmed that he had suffered a severe concussion, a cracked rib, and bruises all over his body from the fall. It was a miracle he had survived the night in the open, lying on the hard ground with nothing but Thunder's presence to protect him from the cold and the dangers of the wilderness. Back at the ranch, Thunder remained restless. He had been brought back to his stable, where the ranch hands took turns checking in on him, but the horse wouldn't settle. He refused to eat more than a few bites of hay, and whenever the barn doors creaked open, his head would shoot up with hopeful eyes, as if expecting Ethan to walk through the door. Sam watched Thunder carefully, shaking his head in disbelief. He had grown up on the ranch, seen countless horses come and go, but Thunder was unlike any other. "It's like he knows," Sam muttered to one of the other hands, Ben, who was tending to the horses. Ben nodded, leaning on his pitchfork. "That horse has a bond with Ethan. You can't fake that kind of loyalty. Animals like him, they don't forget. I swear he's waiting for Ethan to come back." Meanwhile, Ethan was still unconscious in his hospital bed. Machines beeped softly in the sterile white room, the rhythmic sounds a constant reminder of his fragile state. His face, though bruised, looked peaceful, as though he were simply sleeping. A nurse passed by his room, pausing briefly to check his vitals before moving on, oblivious to the invisible connection that was pulling Thunder's heartstrings back at the ranch. Thunder spent his days pacing in the paddock, his hooves kicking up dry dirt. At night, he would stand by the fence, staring out toward the hills as the sun dipped below the horizon. The ranch hands took turns walking him around the property, but no amount of comfort could ease his anxiety. It was as if the horse believed that Ethan was still out there, lost somewhere on the vast plains, waiting for him. One evening, Sam couldn't take it anymore. He walked out to the paddock after dinner, a blanket slung over his shoulder, and climbed up onto the fence where Thunder stood silently. The horse turned his head toward Sam, his deep eyes filled with something the ranch hand couldn't quite explain: grief, worry, hope. Sam reached out a hand, gently stroking Thunder's mane. "He'll be back, boy," he said softly. "He's tough. Tougher than anyone I know. He just needs some time." Thunder let out a low, rumbling sound as if he understood the words. Sam sighed, shaking his head. "You're loyal, you know that? Most folks don't get that kind of loyalty in a lifetime." Thunder nuzzled Sam's shoulder, and for a moment, the two shared an unspoken understanding. The horse's heart was hurting, and so was Sam's. The days stretched on, and news of Thunder's loyalty began to spread beyond the ranch. It started with a simple story told in town, how a horse had stayed by his injured rider's side all night, refusing to leave him. People listened with awe and curiosity, passing the tale from neighbor to neighbor. Before long, it made its way to a local reporter, who visited the ranch with a camera crew to see Thunder for herself. Sam was the one who greeted her, though he wasn't particularly fond of being on camera. "You're here to see the horse, I take it?" he asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. The reporter nodded, her expression soft. "We've heard the story. Everyone's talking about it. I'd like to see him, and maybe hear more about what happened." Sam led her to the paddock, where Thunder stood in his usual spot by the fence, staring out at the horizon. The reporter gasped quietly when she saw him. "It's like he's waiting for someone," she murmured. "That's because he is," Sam said, his voice low. "He's waiting for Ethan." The crew captured footage of Thunder, his watchful eyes, his restless movements, his quiet demeanor. They filmed as Sam shared the story of the accident, his voice tinged with emotion as he recounted how Thunder had refused to leave Ethan's side, staying with him through the long, cold night. When the story aired on the local news that evening, it struck a chord with viewers. Thunder became a symbol of loyalty, devotion, and unconditional love. People from all over began calling the ranch, leaving messages of support for Ethan and Thunder. Some sent letters, others brought flowers and cards, and a few even left carrots and apples for Thunder, as if to thank him for what he had done. "Look at this," Ben said one morning, holding up a bundle of mail. "People are calling him a hero. Thunder, the loyal horse." Sam chuckled, shaking his head. "He doesn't care about all that. He just wants Ethan back." At the hospital, Ethan's condition finally began to improve. After nearly a week, he stirred for the first time, his fingers twitching as he slowly opened his eyes. The faint, sterile glow of the hospital lights greeted him, and for a moment he was disoriented, unsure of where he was. A nurse noticed the change and rushed to his side, calling out to the doctor. Ethan's groggy gaze shifted to the ceiling, his mind struggling to piece together what had happened. Flashes of memory flickered in his head. The ride through the field, Thunder's panicked whinny, the ground rushing up to meet him. "Thunder," he whispered hoarsely. The doctor smiled as he checked Ethan's vitals. "Welcome back, Ethan. You've been through quite the ordeal." Ethan's voice was weak, but he pushed through the haze. "Where's Thunder?" "He's back at the ranch," the doctor replied gently. "He's been waiting for you." News of Ethan's recovery spread quickly. When Sam heard the news, he couldn't hide the grin that spread across his face. "Ethan's awake," he told Ben, his voice full of relief. Ben let out a low whistle. "Thunder's gonna lose his mind when he sees him." That afternoon, Sam decided to take Thunder for a ride, one he hoped would lead to a long-overdue reunion. Thunder seemed to sense that something was different. He stood still as Sam saddled him up, his ears twitching expectantly, his body humming with energy. "You know where we're going, don't you?" Sam said with a smile, patting Thunder's neck. Thunder let out a sharp whinny as if in response. At the hospital, Ethan was propped up in a wheelchair, dressed in a hospital gown and a borrowed flannel shirt. His body was still sore, and he moved gingerly, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there since the accident. When the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the parking lot, Ethan's head snapped up. "Thunder?" A nurse wheeled him toward the entrance, and there, standing just beyond the glass doors, was Thunder. Sam held the reins, a wide smile on his face as he guided the horse closer. Thunder's ears perked up, and the moment he saw Ethan, he let out a loud, joyful whinny that turned heads all around. "Easy there, boy," Sam said, though his voice was thick with emotion. "He's here. He's okay." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he reached out a trembling hand. "Thunder?" The nurse pushed him closer, and Thunder lowered his head, pressing his soft muzzle against Ethan's hand. Ethan closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks as he whispered, "You stayed with me, didn't you?" Thunder let out a low, contented sound, nuzzling Ethan's shoulder as if to say, "I'm here. I never left." The reunion between Ethan and Thunder at the hospital entrance became an unforgettable scene. A small crowd had gathered, nurses, doctors, and patients, drawn by the sound of Thunder's whinny. Some held their phones up to capture the moment, while others simply watched with teary eyes. There was something profoundly beautiful about the sight of a strong, proud horse gently nuzzling the hand of his injured rider, as if making a silent promise to never leave his side again. Ethan smiled weakly through his tears, his fingers brushing through Thunder's mane. "I missed you, buddy," he whispered. Thunder's soft huff of breath seemed to reply, "I missed you too." Sam stood off to the side, his hat in hand, unable to stop the lump in his throat. "Well, would you look at that?" he said quietly to the nurse beside him. "They're two halves of the same heart." The nurse nodded, wiping her eyes. "You don't see that kind of loyalty every day." It's like he knew Ethan needed him. Thunder stayed calm despite the bustle around him. For as long as Ethan sat in the wheelchair, Thunder refused to move, his large dark eyes locked on his rider as if ensuring he wouldn't vanish again. Ethan's voice was faint, but he managed to speak to Sam. "How has he been?" Sam sighed, patting Thunder's flank. "Not the same without you. He hasn't been eating right or sleeping much. All he's done is stare at the horizon, like he was waiting for you to come home." Ethan blinked, stunned. "He really waited for me?" Sam's voice softened. "Every single day." The doctor, who had been watching from a distance, finally stepped forward. "Ethan, I'm glad you're doing better, but you still need time to heal. I don't think you're ready to ride just yet." Ethan chuckled faintly, shaking his head. "I don't need to ride him. I just need to see him." In the days that followed, the hospital staff arranged for Thunder to visit Ethan daily. They set up a makeshift paddock outside the building, where Thunder could roam freely. Every morning, Sam would bring the horse into town and Ethan, though still confined to a wheelchair, would sit outside with him. Thunder would greet him with a gentle nuzzle, sometimes resting his head in Ethan's lap as if to say, "I've got you now. You're safe." The story of their bond continued to spread. Local newspapers picked up the tale, publishing headlines like "Loyal Horse Stays by Rider's Side Through the Night" and "A Bond Beyond Words. Thunder the Hero Horse." People across the state read about Thunder's unwavering devotion, and messages of love and support poured in. Children sent hand-drawn pictures of horses, while others wrote letters praising Thunder as a hero. "Ethan," Sam said one afternoon, handing him a bundle of letters. "You've got more fan mail than anyone in this town?" Ethan smiled as he sifted through the letters. One particularly touching note caught his eye. It was from a little girl named Lily who wrote, "Dear Thunder and Ethan, I'm so happy you're okay. My dog stayed with me when I was sick, so I know how animals can love us no matter what. Thunder is the bravest horse ever and you're lucky to have him. Please give him a hug for me." Ethan's voice trembled as he read the letter aloud to Sam. "Kids get it, don't they? They understand how special animals are." Sam nodded, his expression serious. "That they do. People like Lily remind us what really matters." By the end of the second week, Ethan had made significant progress. He was able to stand with help and take a few cautious steps. The doctors were optimistic, telling him that his determination to recover was speeding up the healing process. What they didn't know, though, was that Ethan's strength came from Thunder. Every time he looked out the window and saw his loyal friend standing patiently in the paddock, he felt a surge of hope that pushed him to keep going. One afternoon, Sam brought Thunder closer to Ethan's window. The horse let out a soft whinny as if calling for him. Ethan turned to the nurse by his side. "Help me outside, please." "Ethan, are you sure?" "You've been pushing yourself pretty hard," she replied, concerned. "I need to see him up close," Ethan said firmly. "I owe him that much." The nurse helped him into the wheelchair and wheeled him outside. As soon as they approached Thunder, the horse lowered his head, his large, soulful eyes watching Ethan carefully. Ethan reached out a trembling hand, brushing it along Thunder's face. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved me." Thunder leaned into the touch, closing his eyes in contentment. It was a simple moment, but it spoke volumes. Two friends separated by an accident, now reunited through love and loyalty. As Ethan's health continued to improve, he began to talk about returning to the ranch. "I can't sit here forever," he told Sam one day. "The ranch needs me and so does Thunder." Sam, who had been visiting daily, grinned. "The ranch has been holding up just fine, but I'll admit, Thunder hasn't been himself without you there. He's ready to take you home." Ethan's doctor finally gave him the all-clear to leave the hospital, though he warned that he would need to take it easy for a while. "No riding for at least a few weeks," the doctor said sternly. "Give your body time to fully heal." Ethan smiled, shaking the doctor's hand. "Don't worry. I'll listen to you, for once." When the day of Ethan's discharge arrived, the ranch hands organized a small welcome home gathering. They decorated the barn with banners and ribbons, and even prepared a special stall for Thunder, complete with fresh hay and a warm blanket. Sam picked up Ethan from the hospital, driving him back to the ranch in an old pickup truck. Thunder, who had been standing near the barn, let out an excited whinny as soon as he saw the truck pull in. Ethan chuckled, his heart swelling with emotion. He's been waiting for this, Sam said, smiling. So have you? The reunion at the ranch was everything Ethan had hoped for. As Sam helped him out of the truck, Thunder trotted over, his tail swishing and ears perked forward. The moment Ethan stood on his own 2 feet, Thunder pressed his head against Ethan's chest, as if checking to make sure he was really there. "I'm home, boy," Ethan murmured, wrapping his arms around Thunder's neck. "We made it." The ranch hands gathered nearby, watching with smiles on their faces. Even the toughest cowboys couldn't help but get choked up at the sight of Ethan and Thunder together again. Sam wiped his eyes discreetly, muttering, "Darn dust keeps getting in my eyes." That night, Ethan sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Thunder stood nearby, grazing peacefully, finally at ease now that his rider was home. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the horse who had saved his life. "You know, Thunder," he said softly, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Thunder lifted his head, his ears flicking toward Ethan as if he understood every word. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan continued to heal. With the help of Sam and the other ranch hands, he slowly regained his strength, spending time with Thunder every day. They walked together through the fields, side by side, their bond stronger than ever. The story of Ethan and Thunder's loyalty became a legend in the area. People visited the ranch just to see the hero horse, leaving gifts and donations to help support the ranch. But for Ethan, none of that mattered. All he cared about was that Thunder had been there for him when he needed it most. One day, as Ethan sat on a fence post watching Thunder run freely through the pasture, he smiled to himself. "You know, Thunder," he said aloud, "you're more than just a horse. You're family." Thunder paused mid-gallop, turning to look at Ethan with those familiar, knowing eyes. He let out a joyful whinny before galloping toward his rider, as if to say, "I know, and I always will be." As the years rolled on, the bond between Ethan and Thunder only deepened. Their story had become the heart of the ranch, drawing visitors from near and far who came to witness the legendary horse that had not only saved a man's life but had become a beacon of hope for so many. Thunder, though aging, carried himself with the same quiet strength that had always defined him. His movements were slower now, his once powerful gallop tempered into an easy, graceful walk, but his spirit remained untouched. For Ethan, Thunder's loyalty became a daily reminder of resilience, a constant companion through the changing seasons of life. One particular autumn evening, Ethan sat by the fence, watching as the leaves drifted down like golden snowflakes. Thunder grazed nearby, his coat glowing in the fading light. The ranch was quiet, save for the soft rustle of the wind. Ethan closed his eyes, allowing himself to drift back through the years, to the day Thunder had stood guard over him, refusing to leave his side. He could still remember the smell of the earth beneath him, the distant hum of life around him as he lay broken and afraid. But above all, he remembered the sound of Thunder's breathing, steady, reassuring, like a heartbeat that kept him tethered to the world. It was that memory that had carried him through the darkest moments of his recovery, reminding him that he wasn't alone. Opening his eyes, Ethan smiled, his gaze settling on Thunder. "You know, boy," he murmured, "I wouldn't be here without you." Thunder lifted his head, ears flicking toward Ethan as if to say, "I know." Ethan chuckled softly, standing up and stretching. "Come on, let's head back. We've got a long winter ahead of us." The following weeks brought a chill to the air. Morning rides were replaced by walks around the pasture, Ethan leading Thunder by the reins as they wandered through the frost-kissed grass. Sam, who had become more of a brother than a ranch hand over the years, often joined them, sharing stories and laughter as they worked to keep the ranch running smoothly. But one morning, as Ethan entered the barn to fetch Thunder's feed, he noticed something unusual. Thunder, who usually waited eagerly for his breakfast, was lying down in his stall, his breathing slow and labored. Ethan's heart clenched as he hurried over, kneeling beside his old friend. "Thunder?" he whispered, running a hand along the horse's neck. "Hey, what's going on, buddy?" Thunder lifted his head slightly, his eyes soft but tired. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. Sam appeared at the stall door moments later, his expression falling as he took in the scene. "Oh no," Sam muttered, stepping inside. "Ethan, I think it's his time." Ethan shook his head, refusing to believe it. "No, he's just tired. He'll be fine." Sam placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice gentle. "He's given you everything he had, Ethan. He's just ready to rest now." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he looked back at Thunder, his chest aching with the weight of it all. For so many years, this horse had been his rock, his friend, his family. And now, as the sun streamed through the barn window, casting a warm glow over Thunder's coat, Ethan realized the truth. Sam was right. Thunder had carried him through storms, through recovery, through life itself, and now he was ready to let go. With trembling hands, Ethan leaned forward, resting his forehead against Thunder's. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "For everything." Thunder let out a deep, steady breath, his eyes closing as Ethan sat with him, refusing to leave his side, just as Thunder had refused to leave him all those years ago. The days that followed were heavy with grief. Ethan buried Thunder beneath the old oak tree where they had spent countless afternoons together, its branches stretching high into the sky like arms reaching for heaven. The entire town came to pay their respects, leaving flowers, notes, and photographs at the base of the tree. Children wrote letters to Thunder, thanking him for being a hero. Old ranchers tipped their hats in silent reverence, acknowledging the legacy of a horse unlike any other. Ethan stood at the edge of the grave long after everyone else had gone, his heart aching with the weight of loss. But as the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the sounds of the ranch, the soft neighs of the other horses, the distant laughter of children, the hum of life continuing, he felt a strange sense of peace. Thunder was gone, but his spirit remained. It was in the land they had explored together, in the sunlit fields and quiet streams. It was in the stories people told, in the lives he had touched without even knowing it. Thunder had become more than a horse. He was a symbol of hope, of loyalty, of the kind of love that transcends words. Years later, a new generation of children ran through the fields of the ranch, their laughter ringing out across the open land. A statue now stood beneath the old oak tree, a bronze likeness of Thunder with his head held high, as if watching over the ranch he had called home. Ethan, now older but still strong, stood beside the statue, his hands resting on the reins of a young colt. The colt was Thunder's grandson, a spirited horse with the same fire in his eyes that had defined his grandfather. "You've got big shoes to fill, little guy," Ethan said softly, patting the colt's neck. "But I think you'll do just fine." Sam, now sporting a head of gray hair, approached with a grin. "You still talk to the horses like they can understand you?" Ethan chuckled, looking out across the fields. "They understand more than we give them credit for, Sam." Sam nodded, his gaze softening. "Thunder would be proud of what you've built here, Ethan." Ethan smiled, his eyes drifting to the horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson. "He's still here, Sam. In every blade of grass, in every hoofprint in the dirt. He's a part of this place forever." As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Ethan led the colt back toward the barn, his heart full. The ranch was alive with the echoes of the past and the promise of the future. And though Thunder was gone, his legacy remained, a reminder that the greatest bonds are forged not in words, but in moments of quiet loyalty, unwavering love, and the simple act of being there when it matters most. And as Ethan glanced back one last time at the statue beneath the oak tree, he smiled, knowing that Thunder's story would live on, forever etched into the soul of the land they had called home. Ethan spent more time at the ranch than ever after Thunder's passing. He couldn't bear to let the memories slip away, so he poured his heart into preserving them. In the mornings, as the mist curled over the fields, he would walk the grounds with a quiet reverence. Sometimes he'd find himself talking to Thunder's spirit, his words soft and carried away on the wind. Other times he would sit under the old oak tree where Thunder rested, notebook in hand, scribbling down stories of their years together. What started as small journal entries soon turned into something much larger. Ethan realized he wasn't just writing for himself, he was writing for Thunder, for the people who had been touched by his loyalty, and for those who needed hope in their own lives. He captured every moment, the day Thunder had saved him, the nights Thunder had stood watch, and the mornings where they'd ridden together in perfect harmony, two souls bound by trust. Each word felt like a tribute, a way to keep Thunder alive. Word spread quickly about Ethan's writings, and soon enough, friends, neighbors, and strangers were asking for copies. Parents read Thunder's story to their children at bedtime, teachers shared it with their students, and ranchers found inspiration in the horse who had become a legend. Ethan's quiet reflections had become a book that resonated far beyond the ranch. One day, a letter arrived at the ranch. It was from a young boy named Jacob who lived in a nearby town. Jacob had been struggling, the letter explained. He had lost his father in a tragic accident, and since then he had become quiet, withdrawn, and afraid. But his mother had come across Ethan's story about Thunder, and something had shifted in Jacob. He was moved by Thunder's refusal to give up, his loyalty, and his strength. The story had helped Jacob believe in hope again, and he had one request: to visit the ranch. When Ethan read the letter, his hands trembled slightly. Thunder had touched lives in ways Ethan never could have imagined. He wrote back to Jacob's mother, inviting them to the ranch that very weekend. The day Jacob arrived, the sun was shining, the fields golden under the wide, blue sky. Jacob was small for his age, with messy brown hair and a quiet, thoughtful expression. He held his mother's hand tightly as they walked up to the barn, his eyes wide as he took in the horses grazing nearby. "Welcome," Ethan said, smiling warmly. "I'm so glad you came." Jacob nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for inviting me." Ethan led them around the ranch, showing them the fields, the barns, and the young horses that Thunder had fathered. But it was when they reached the oak tree that Jacob's eyes lit up. The statue of Thunder stood tall and proud, sunlight dancing across the bronze surface. "This was Thunder," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside Jacob. "He was brave, strong, and full of heart. Just like you." Jacob looked up at Ethan, his eyes shimmering with unspoken emotions. "Did he really save you?" Ethan nodded, his voice thick with feeling. "He did. He saved me in every way that mattered." Jacob's gaze lingered on the statue for a long time before he spoke again. "Do you think he knew he was saving you?" Ethan smiled, placing a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "I think Thunder knew more than we could ever understand. Animals have a way of seeing into our hearts, even when we can't see it ourselves." Jacob's mother wiped a tear from her cheek as her son reached out to touch the statue. For the first time in months, Jacob smiled, a small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Would you like to meet Thunder's grandson?" Ethan asked, his tone gentle. Jacob's face lit up with excitement. "Yes, please." Ethan led them back to the barn, where a young colt named Spirit stood waiting. Spirit was Thunder's mirror image, strong, graceful, and with a spark in his eyes that spoke of the same loyalty and courage his grandfather had possessed. "Go on," Ethan encouraged, handing Jacob a brush. "He's friendly." Jacob hesitated at first, but as Spirit lowered his head and nudged Jacob's arm, the boy giggled softly. He began brushing the colt's coat, his movements growing more confident with each stroke. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart swelling with gratitude. Thunder's story hadn't ended with his passing. It lived on in Spirit, in the ranch, and now in Jacob. In the months that followed, the ranch became more than just a home for Ethan. It became a sanctuary for others. Children like Jacob, families looking for peace, and people searching for meaning. Ethan opened the ranch to anyone who needed it, welcoming them with open arms and sharing Thunder's story as a reminder of what loyalty, love, and second chances could bring. Sam often teased Ethan about becoming a storyteller. "I never figured you for a writer, Ethan," he'd say with a grin. "But I'll admit you've got a way with words." Ethan would chuckle and shrug. "It's not about the words, Sam. It's about the truth behind them." Years passed and Ethan grew older. The ranch had flourished into something he could have never dreamed of, and Thunder's legacy continued to inspire countless lives. One summer evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Ethan sat under the old oak tree, now surrounded by flowers and small wooden benches where visitors could sit and reflect. Spirit grazed nearby, his movements calm and deliberate, much like Thunder's had been. Ethan closed his eyes, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch, the rustle of leaves, the distant neighing of horses, the laughter of children carried on the wind. He could feel Thunder's presence there, as real as it had been all those years ago. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, his voice carried into the evening air. "For everything." It was a simple sentence, but it held the weight of decades of love, loss, healing, and hope. Thunder had saved him in every sense of the word, and now his spirit had saved others too. As Ethan stood to leave, he turned back one last time, his eyes resting on the statue beneath the oak tree. The light of the setting sun bathed it in gold, as if Thunder himself was watching over the ranch, proud of all that had been built in his honor. And as Ethan walked back toward the barn, his heart full, he knew one thing for certain. Thunder's story would live on forever. Not just in words or memories, but in every life he had touched, every second chance he had inspired, and in the boundless love that transcended time itself.